to the 1, from the 1 to the 3. I like good pussy and I like good trees. Smoke so much weed you wouldn't believe. And I get more ass than a toilet seat. 3 to the 1, from the 1 to the 3. I met a bad bitch last night in the D. Let me tell you how.
This is my life now.
Conversation and
Threw everything else away. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Someone
save me.
ReZero is the latest in a procession of massively successful yet massively polarizing anime series that seem to be coming out at a steady rate of about one per year. Looking at them side by side, the shows that seem to catch on like wildfire definitely bear a number of things in common, but unlike with a lot of those other shows, something really frustrating seems to be happening with ReZero. Despite being by far the most popular and talked about show of 2016, I'm finding that very few people can adequately put into words what actually makes this series so exceptional. The show is clearly reaching people, but in a way that doesn't really lend itself well to explanation. Then there's this whole other group of people who don't get the appeal and are forced to come to their own conclusions. Like, they must love this show for the same reasons they loved all those other shows. The self-insert protagonists, the cute girls, the gory fights, etc. And these two groups just keep getting bigger and louder and the cycle of miscommunication continues. Now, a quick skim of the premise makes ReZero seem like an open and shut case. A young human gets whisked away from his society to a fantastical realm through surreptitious means. He can't die for whatever reason and needs to strategically utilize his ability to advance, with all of his various attempts subtly affecting each other. He meets all sorts of colourful characters who seem friendly at first, but if you're not careful they'll turn on you. He has to try over and over to secure his good future, while slowly unravelling the true nature of his circumstances, and if this is starting to seem familiar to you, you're not the only one. This is just a race to fuse with Konosuba, goddammit. Now here's the interesting part. Nothing about this trite, worn-thin premise seemed to interest anyone, and is certainly not responsible for the show's frankly insane boom in popularity. In fact, all the most glaring exercises in anime tedium seem to be intentionally downplayed by the series, giving it this very nebulous, conflicted identity. Its world is filled with magical mascots and wolf people and the like, but it doesn't really do a whole lot with these ideas. It seems to have the air of your common ecchi series with its fetishy maids and cute girls, but there's surprisingly little in the way of fan service. It appears to have all the working parts of a harem, but it doesn't deliver on that in any way. The show stars what seems to be a generic self-insert character, who's also not that at all. It's like ReZero's just wearing the skin of your basic light novel adaptation, while being something else entirely underneath. Like it's all in service for some larger point or something. Then there's the second giant hurdle for me potentially getting into a series like this. I hate the emergent self-defined otaku character trope. Not to say that there's anything wrong with a character being an otaku, and when used to infer other aspects of their personality, it can actually be really clever, but more often than not, it just strikes me as a convenient, lazy means of giving the audience someone that they can easily identify with, which is problematic, not only in the sense that it often strips said character of any other personality traits, but also because it's effectively the writers telling you that this show has a very specific audience. So with this in mind, in addition to being adapted from yet another light novel about being dropped unceremoniously into a parallel world, one of the most bloated subgenres of the decade, ReZero couldn't be further from my strike zone. So really, no one's inexplicable love of this series could be more baffling than my own, so maybe I'm the best person to be making this video. Let's start with the most apparent and by far most divisive aspect of the series, the protagonist. Two ways in which Natsuki Subaru completely exceeded my expectations was in how he not only had something to say about his archetype, but also the simple fact that he actually has a personality. He's completely lacking in style or charisma, but in a way that's totally believable, and kind of charming in its own right. The way he gleefully bounds around this world like he's imagined this scenario 1,000 times, the way he introduces himself with fanfare and a reverence that screams, "I'm the main character and this is my anime." Subaru actually behaves the way I expect a goofy nerd would under these circumstances, and even in these early episodes it's easy to get behind his motivations because he expresses himself in such earnest terms. Like, how many anime MCs can you think of that just openly, shamelessly flirt with the girl they like? It's almost like I'm watching a show about a human and not some bot. For me, this was ReZero's initial hook. Yet interestingly enough, this seems to be exactly what so many people hated about Subaru. His behaviour has been described as cringy and insufferably awkward, while just as many people consider him relatable. Essentially, the thing that attracted me to Subaru as a character was the very thing that made him repulsive to others. Hilariously enough, the characters in the series react to Subaru in pretty much the same way, ranging from bewilderment to frustration and all the way to a sort of demure fondness. It's almost like the audience was feeling this strange secondhand embarrassment for Subaru, and that feeling only grew stronger and more visceral during the show's run, which was not only entirely the point, but also kind of crucial to the series moving forward, for reasons that will become more apparent later on. Episode 4 was the moment that truly sold me. At this point, Subaru has detected his heroine, Amelia, and is head over heels in love with her. Not necessarily as a girl, but as a waifu. He worships the ground she walks on, gives her a cutesy nickname, and vehemently defends her against even the slightest opposition, like a fussy nerd in some forum. This doesn't necessarily make Amelia uncomfortable or anything, in fact she seems to genuinely find him charming, but it remains a pervasive source of tension in the early parts of the series. Subaru appoints himself the hero of this series and Amelia's personal knight, but for anyone paying attention, he really doesn't act like one. I mean, he certainly does heroic things and suffers a great deal to help his friends, but this is all the result of an otherworldly power he's been afforded and did nothing to earn. Subaru himself is actually kind of shallow, juvenile, and most concerningly self-absorbed. He frames his climactic battle with the Marbeasts around the ultimate goal of scoring a date, and while we too share that desire, it's certainly not the way our hero is supposed to be approaching a conflict with hundreds of lives riding on it. His entire approach to this role just kinda seems wrong-headed. Understandable for sure, but wrong-headed. At first, it seems as if the series is content to ignore this attribute of Subaru's character. He claws his way through the first arc with little a problem, and everything seems to work out. I was pretty concerned that the show was presenting us with this morally dubious protagonist without actually challenging his conflicted mindset, all in the name of, again, giving the audience someone with whom they can easily identify. Thankfully, this doesn't last, and Subaru's self-defeating nature starts rearing its ugly head the second he's forced to resign from relevance. The threat of danger is past, and Emilia has some political business to deal with back at the capital, gently asking Subaru to stay at the mansion and rest. He ignores her. She then asks that he kindly stays away from the royal selection because she doesn't want him to see how the officials treat her and likely cause a scene. He ignores her, wedging himself back into the spotlight in a way that comes off less as chivalrous and more excruciatingly obstinate. Emilia then pleads with Subaru to stop hysterically embarrassing the both of them with his horribly misguided attempts at righteousness. Subaru then gives in to all his worst instincts and makes a total clown of himself, and her in the process, because he genuinely believes that's how these kinds of stories work. He pedestalizes Emilia to the point of absurdity. He makes horribly ill-informed claims about the supposed corruption of the royal knights, which to be fair is usually the case for bureaucrats in these kind of shows, and to top it all off challenges one of the nation's most accomplished fighters to a duel, cause I guess he thought his plot armor would lead to victory. And you know, he was almost right. Subaru honestly would have been better off if Julius killed him right then and there, but instead he's forced to wake up and deal with the consequences of his actions. This altercation in episode 13 was the moment I realized I was watching something special. It was the moment I realized this was a series with a richness of character and conflict that I never expected from this genre. It was the moment that everything started to make sense. As ReZero reveals, it was never a show about slaying wolves and chasing girls. This time, Subaru was his own worst enemy. Emilia holds Subaru accountable for his piss-poor decision making, and he has the nerve to try and excuse himself by saying that he did it all because he loves her. Which isn't untrue, he does love her, but it's a horribly misplaced love. It's a juvenile, possessive, self-serving kind of love that manifests itself outwardly as fixation or even entitlement, in the words of one of my own waifus.
What you're feeling is called infatuation. The pain is a product of you overvaluing a projected imaginary relationship with me.
It's not that Subaru was behaving this way intentionally. His distraught in this scene is largely a result of him just now realizing how he was making Emilia feel. He's not a bad person or anything, he's just young and stupid and lonely and doesn't really understand people, and oh my god, it's just now sinking in. A message the show has been beating us over the head with since episode 1. Natsuki Subaru is us. He's all of us. Subaru isn't just an otaku character, he's the otaku character. He's everything that word has come to mean, all the good and all the bad. People that identify with characters and ideas so strongly that they become fundamental to our perceptions of ourselves. We plaster them all over our rooms, we print them onto our clothing, we argue furiously about them with strangers. ReZero's question is this: in a purely hypothetical sense, would all the idolizing and fanaticism and waifu wars actually make that character happy? Or would it just creep them out? Subaru loves Emilia squarely as a waifu, but this dynamic exists entirely within the realm of fantasy, a fantasy that he's expecting, or rather demanding, her to be complicit in, which is enough to make Emilia lose faith in him as a trusted companion. In a legitimately heart-rending display, Emilia tells Subaru in no uncertain terms that the idea of her that exists in his head is false. She isn't this perfect princess that can do no wrong. She isn't this amazing empath that can understand things he doesn't explain, and she certainly can't make excuses for him. She isn't a waifu. I mean, she can be, but that's certainly not all she is. She's a person with her own life and her own goals, lofty ambitions that reach far beyond the scope of some kid's wish fulfillment fantasies. For lack of a better word, she's human. Or half-elf, whatever. And considering the upcoming election and the vicious stigma she's been forced to bear, the last thing she needs is a guy pinning ribbons to her who barely even seems to have her best interests at heart.
私ね、期待してたの。ひょっとしたらスバルは私を、スバルだけは私を特別扱いしないんじゃないかって。他の普通の人と同じように区別しないで見てくれるんじゃないかって。
In short, Emilia refuses to be a cog in Subaru's grand designs, and if he can't accept that, he needs to go. In one foul swoop, Emilia dealt more damage to Subaru than those wolves ever could, and what's worse is this is a mistake that he can't come back from. Fast forward an episode, and this small interpersonal conflict has laid the groundwork for a vortex of suffering with no end in sight. With an impending disaster rapidly approaching and more lives than ever at stake, Subaru is no longer the hero equipped for the job. Now that his anchor's gone, whatever false idea of nobility he'd built for himself is crumbling down around him, and the next 4 episodes serve to reinforce what this character is. Subaru is a mirror to our own failings as a people, our entitlement, our cowardice, our sloth. That's not to say Subaru speaks for every dumb neat millennial or that every otaku watching will be able to relate to his internal conflict, but I am saying that Subaru at his ugliest is all the worst things about all these people, and this is ultimately what made viewers turn on him so vehemently. He's not the first character of this nature by any means, but while Tomoko from Watamote died for our sins in a way that was hilarious and only occasionally cringy, Subaru does so in a way that's straight up uncomfortable, while also being unmistakably human. This isn't a character that calmly invites the audience to reflect on themselves. This is a character that outright demands self-reflection from the audience, and that's something that will almost never be warmly received. Though I'm sure there are plenty of people that hate Subaru purely on the grounds for him being an insufferable douche a lot of the time, in which case, fair enough. Either way, I'm sure I'm far from the only one who saw fragments of myself in this character, and I honestly can't say that about any other isekai protagonists. These shows were never supposed to be about empathy. They're supposed to be exactly what it says on the tin. An escape from reality. In Sword Art Online, the real-world Kirito is a reclusive shut-in with no social skills or prospects, but when he gets sucked into Alfheim, the rules changed. His old reality disappeared and was replaced by a world built entirely around him. All the most impressive abilities gravitated towards him, all the cutest girls gravitated towards him, all the coolest scenarios gravitated towards him. This new reality was entirely structured for him to be at the center of it all. And while the world of ReZero seems to superficially resemble this in appearance, it certainly doesn't in practice, and this was Subaru's crucial misunderstanding. That otaku aesthetic was nothing more than a thinly veiled red herring. This is still a world that expects all the same things of him as the one he's familiar with, and he responds in kind, by thrashing in the darkness of his own psyche, falling deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole of self-loathing and isolation. The darkest timeline isn't just the one with the grisliest outcomes and goriest deaths, it's also the timeline with Subaru at his ugliest, his most impulsive, his most hysterical and self-defeating. If it wasn't clear yet, this isn't just a story about a bunch of politicians and some goofy cult. It's a story about a character coming to terms with his own inner demons and working to combat them. But before Subaru can make any progress, he's got to hit rock bottom. In episode 18, Subaru gives up, resolving to abandon his mission and save the person closest to him and retreat to sunny Mexico. In a moment of brutal emotional honesty, he unleashes a tirade of the gods, tearfully reconciling the person he is with the person he's been pretending to be. He tells us how he squandered his life away and let the world pass him by, and how absurd it was for him to believe that he could do right by a person like Amelia. There was never anything remarkable about him. He just found himself in a remarkable circumstance. This scene is incredibly powerful, not only in that it provides us with this intimate glance into Subaru's soul, but it also encapsulates all of ReZero's central themes. On the day that Otaku finally croaks, this speech will be emblazoned on its tombstone. But then we have Rem, who sees things entirely different. In her eyes, Subaru is this giving, magnanimous figure who's performed countless amazing feats, and that impression is just as real as his. What Rem is essentially telling Subaru here is that he isn't limited by the idea of himself that exists in his head, and she knows this because he's the one that taught her that very same lesson earlier in the series. You see how it's all coming together? The moment you allow yourself to be defined by your failings is the moment you truly lose yourself. She assures him that he can rewrite his destiny anytime he wants to. We all can. All you have to do is pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start again. From ReZero.
Boo! That was real gay, my nigga! Cut that out!
Rem has by far the most easy to understand character development and narrative arc, and is generally the most likable personality in the series. It's no surprise at all that she's far and away the show's most celebrated character. And that's all well and good, I like Rem too, but I've got to address this goofy assertion that Subaru should have chose her. By far the most reviled part of this series is Subaru rejecting her, and to that I say, is the entire irony of the series lost on you? Think about who Rem is. In addition to being a subservient powerhouse, she's a girl that is completely, utterly in love with you exactly as you are. She asks nothing of you and doesn't want or need you to grow or change. Moreover, she'll decimate anyone who poses a threat to you. Narratively and emotionally, Rem is a crutch, which is why Subaru in the series at large is so quick to downplay her. Ask yourself, is this the goal that's going to make Subaru a better person? Just like Subaru, Amelia is emblematic of a larger goal, being the path to self-betterment. As adorable as her description of their hypothetical life together was, there was a reason Rem refused to run away with him, because, in her words, she knows him well enough to know that he isn't someone who's comfortable running away. That's what Rem represents in this scenario, running away. It would make no narrative or thematic sense for Subaru to lean on Rem in this case. What would the lesson of this series be? Accepting your limitations, taking what life gives you, and ignoring your problems. It completely undermines Subaru's character arc and the entire point of the show, and that's one thing that everyone seems to be struggling with in ReZero, even now that it's over. What is the point? What does any of this actually mean?
What exactly were the central themes of the plot?
What was ReZero actually about?
Like Subaru's
I mean,
semi-harem, the
we have
confusing
the antiques
timeline that
roadshow,
could just be
Hayate
construed
the
as the
dickhead
writers trying
butler.
too hard.
There is not even a message or a point in all this mess.
Who the fuck cares about this plot and why? Why? I want to sit down with someone who cares about this plot and just grill them. How could you care about this?
All the answers are staring us in the face. This scene, this episode, the entire series, it's all been begging a subtle question. What is the nature of a real hero? Or in broader terms, what does it mean to be a good person? And the final stretch of episodes offers a surprisingly robust answer to that question. What Subaru has learned at this point is that being a good person takes a great deal more than superpowers and good intentions. It takes more than trying your best or never giving up. So, what does it take? Well, among other things, it takes critical thinking, self-assessment, compromise, tenacity, empathy, and ultimately, sacrifice. What's so cool about these final episodes is that Subaru doesn't even really change. I mean, the Otaku may be meek, cowardly, and antisocial, but he's also incredibly resourceful. He's a master strategist and surprisingly intuitive. Remember, Subaru is the embodiment of Otaku, all the good and all the bad. He simply readjusted his priorities. Instead of working single-mindedly to secure the perfect happy ending for him and Emilia by any belligerent means necessary, Subaru is now working to do the most good for the largest possible amount of people, regardless of how it affects him. And he achieves so much more as a result. He coordinates and spearheads a successful attack on one of the most deadly creatures in history, forging powerful alliances in the process. He swallows his pride and mends broken relationships for the sake of the cause. He motivates people to persevere and be at their best, not because he's an amazing warrior, but because he's a virtuous soul. This is what a hero truly is, someone who inspires people with their strength of character, not in the pursuit of accolades, but rather self-vindication. I was actually thinking that maybe the best way to end this series was with Subaru dying for the last time. Considering the direction the show was going, it seemed the most appropriate way to resolve everything would be with Subaru securing a good future that he doesn't get to indulge in or receive praise for. Thankfully, the show had a markedly more satisfying ending in mind. So, after uniting the nation, slaying the white whale, evacuating the villagers, and literally punching his vices in the face, Subaru is finally rewarded. Not with anything so frivolous as a parade or a night ship or a kiss on the nose with a slice of cake. That shit's for the birds. Subaru is rewarded with the one thing he's never achieved and has always yearned for. Genuine human connection.
My man!
Now at a glance, there's nothing to write home about. Emilia didn't give him her hand in marriage or a kiss. She doesn't even necessarily love him. But the point is, she can love him. He's proven himself as someone worthy of being loved, not just to Emilia, but to himself. For anyone still trying to piece together what this story is about, this scene underscores the point perfectly. It's a story about a boy weaseling his way back into a societal structure that he thought rejected him, applying his unique skill set to the betterment of everyone, and being rewarded with the admiration and respect of a person that means more to him than anything. It's a rejection of escapism, and a look into the mind of those drawn to escapism. For those labeling it a takedown of otaku culture, I'd argue that it's more broadly a meditation on the otaku condition, while also celebrating many aspects of that culture. It's a story about self-improvement and critique, and it's a story that challenges the viewer to do the same. When described in that light, it starts to make a lot of sense how this show managed to reach so many people at this specific time. It was kind of the perfect show at the perfect time for the perfect audience. Not to say that I consider ReZero perfect by any means. I'd tighten up the pacing in places, I'd clean up some of the action scenes, I'd give some characters more screen time, I'd axe other characters entirely, you know, typical anime complaints. But thematically and emotionally, this series went above and beyond my expectations, and it's definitely one of the most special anime of the year for me. So, now that I solved ReZero forever, all that's left to do is apply its wisdom to our own lives. Next time you feel trapped, and like every day is the same, and you have no place in the world, and no matter what decision you make, you always end up where you started, slow down, take a breath, and try something new. Put every past failing behind you and give yourself something to work towards. It doesn't have to be a goal, it can be anything, even a YouTube channel. Like Subaru, you might find that you're capable of so much more than you ever gave yourself credit for, building meaningful connections with great friends that bring out the best in you. And if you're lucky, maybe even inspiring people along the way. And if all that sounds too hard, you can just keep watching my videos, whatever works for you. See you in the next one.